When I was 16, something happened that changed my perspective on family forever. My mom, Diana, married her husband, Paul, 2 years ago. Mom's 40, and Paul is 42. My parents never got married. I was the result of a brief college fling. When my mom found out she was pregnant, she decided to keep me, and my dad, Mark, wanted to be part of my life. They settled on shared custody, alternating months, so I split my time between their homes. Looking back, I realize how much they sacrificed to make this arrangement work. Both turned down career opportunities to stay in the same city so I wouldn't face a tough commute. Mom even rejected relationships that might have made her happy, all to focus on raising me. At least, that's what she told me, usually when she wanted me to see things her way. Mom's marriage to Paul wasn't easy for me to adjust to. I didn't hate him, but it became clear he didn't like me. He didn't try to hide it either. We didn't argue or exchange harsh words. We didn't talk at all. He acted like I didn't exist, ignoring me in a way that stung more than outright hostility. It wasn't always this way. In the beginning, Paul made an effort, asking me about school or my interests, but after a few visits, he went silent. I couldn't figure out what I'd done wrong. When I asked Mom, she brushed it off, saying he wasn't used to kids because his late wife had handled everything with his 2 sons, 15-year-old Ryan and 12-year-old Ethan. But that explanation didn't sit right, especially since he'd managed to get along fine with me initially. After a year of dating, Paul proposed, and he and his kids moved in. I was optimistic at first. Maybe having them around full-time would help us bond. Instead, it got worse. Paul and his boys ignored me completely, treating me like a ghost in my own home. Mom said I should be patient and understand Paul's behavior. She insisted he wasn't a bad guy, just struggling to adjust. Her guilt trips about the sacrifices she made for me started to pile up. Every time I mentioned how hurtful Paul's treatment was, she'd remind me she chose me over love and career. It was as if I owed her tolerance for whatever she chose to throw my way. The silence and cold shoulders became unbearable. Imagine living in a house where the only person who acknowledges you is your mom, and even she won't confront her husband about his behavior. That was my reality. Eventually, I stopped caring. If Paul and his kids didn't want to interact, fine. I still had my dad's house every other month, but even there I couldn't fully escape the tension. Mom had made it clear she didn't want Dad involved in anything Paul-related. Then came the breaking point. Last month, during my summer break, I woke up one morning to find the house empty. Mom, Paul, and his kids were gone. At first I thought they'd gone to the store or out for breakfast, but the hours stretched on. When I called Mom, she casually told me they were on a week-long vacation. "You're 16, Brian," she said, as if that justified everything. "You can manage alone for a few days." Her tone made it sound like she'd done me a favor by not taking me. She didn't see the problem with leaving me home alone, unprepared and uninformed. I was furious. Not only had she excluded me, but she'd also treated me like an afterthought. If she'd asked, I might have been fine staying home alone. I could have invited friends over or enjoyed the quiet. But the way she handled it felt insulting. I told her this, but she dismissed me, saying I was overreacting. Then she hung up. That was the final straw. I called my dad, explained what happened, and left the house. Before heading out, I locked up and left the keys under a potted plant, the same spot Mom always used. When I arrived at Dad's place, he was surprised to see me. I told him everything: Paul's cold treatment, Mom's excuses, and how they'd left me behind like I didn't matter. For the first time in years, I let it all out. The years of feeling invisible, the emotional toll of being the unwanted piece in Mom's new family puzzle. Dad listened, his face a mixture of sadness and anger. He promised me one thing: I wouldn't have to go back to that house if I didn't want to. For the next few days, I didn't hear from Mom. I thought maybe she'd realized how wrong she was and needed time to cool off. But when she finally called, it wasn't to check on me. It was to yell. That's when things spiraled even further out of control. When Mom finally called, I picked up, hoping maybe she'd realized how hurtful her actions were. But instead of an apology, I got an earful. She was yelling so loudly that I could barely make out what she was saying at first. Then it hit me. The house had been robbed. Someone had broken in and stolen the TV, some jewelry, and a few other expensive items. And somehow, it was all my fault. You left the house empty, Brian, she shouted, her voice trembling with anger. I trusted you to stay there and take care of it, and this is what happens? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I reminded her that I had tried to call her to let her know I was leaving. She'd ignored me, sending me to voicemail every time. You could have texted me, she snapped. Maybe she had a point, but at that moment, I didn't care. I was furious. Are you serious right now? You left me alone without telling me where you were going, and now you're blaming me for this? The conversation spiraled into a full-blown argument. I told her how betrayed I felt, how hurt I was that she hadn't even bothered to clue me in about their plans. But she didn't seem to care. All she kept saying was how irresponsible I'd been for leaving the house unattended. It was your job to stay there, she said, her voice dripping with accusation. No, Mom, I shot back. It was your job to treat me like I mattered. And you failed. That's when Paul got on the phone. For the first time in years, he spoke to me directly. Not to ask how I was doing or to try and patch things up. No, he called to blame me too. This is exactly why I never wanted you around, Paul said coldly. I knew you'd ruin things for us eventually. I was stunned. I didn't even know what to say. His words hit me like a punch to the gut. He went on, accusing me of being selfish and careless, and then hung up. For someone who had spent years pretending I didn't exist. He certainly had a lot to say now. After that call, I felt like I was drowning in anger and frustration. I'd tried so hard to be a good kid, to be patient with Paul and his sons, to keep the peace for my mom's sake. And this was the thanks I got? When I told my dad what happened, he was livid. He said Mom and Paul had no right to treat me like this, especially after everything I'd endured. For the first time, I felt like someone was truly on my side. Dad didn't waste any time. He contacted his lawyer and started the process of filing for full custody. You're not going back there, he said firmly. Not if I have anything to say about it. Meanwhile, Mom kept calling, alternating between guilt-tripping me and demanding an apology. She said things like, I sacrificed so much for you, Brian. Can't you just take responsibility for once? But I wasn't going to cave this time. I stayed with Dad, trying to move on, but the drama wasn't over. A few days later, I found out why Paul hated me so much. And it changed everything. One of Paul's relatives, I think it was his sister, reached out to me through Facebook. She said she'd heard about the break-in and wanted to check on me. At first, I thought it was a nice gesture, but then she dropped a bombshell. She told me that years ago, when Paul and Mom first started dating, Paul wanted to move in with Mom and bring his mom along. His mom was sick and needed care, and he thought it would be easier if they all lived together. Mom said no. Apparently, instead of being honest about her reasons, she blamed me. She told Paul I was a difficult, angry kid who didn't want anyone new in our lives. She said I'd driven away other men she dated because I wanted her to myself. She even claimed I'd called Paul's mom a burden and his kids brats. I couldn't believe it. Mom had made me out to be some kind of monster just to avoid telling Paul the truth. This was why Paul and his sons ignored me. Why they treated me like I didn't exist. All because Mom lied to protect herself. When I confronted her about it, she broke down and admitted everything. She said she didn't know how else to handle the situation and that she never meant for it to go this far. But it was too late. Paul found out too. He was furious, not just with Mom, but with himself for believing her lies. Within days, Paul moved out. He told Mom he couldn't stay in a marriage built on deceit. And just like that, her perfect little family fell apart. Paul moved out a week after finding out the truth, and the fallout was intense. Mom was a wreck, constantly calling and texting, begging him to come back. But Paul wasn't having it. For the first time, he was forced to look at the reality of his marriage, and he wasn't sticking around to clean up the mess. At first, I thought I'd feel some sense of vindication. Paul had treated me like dirt for years because of a lie, and now he finally knew the truth. But instead of feeling satisfied, I felt empty. I wasn't sure what to make of the apology email he sent me. In it, he explained how Mom had painted this awful picture of me when they first started dating. She claimed I was the reason her past relationships failed, that I was territorial and spiteful. She even told him that I'd threatened to make his mom's life miserable if she moved in with us. I believed her, Paul wrote. I thought I was protecting my family from someone who didn't want us around. I see now that I was wrong, and I'm sorry for how I treated you. Part of me wanted to forgive him. After all, he hadn't known the truth. But another part of me couldn't get past how he had acted. He never gave me a chance, never tried to talk to me or see who I really was. Instead, he just decided to cut me off entirely. And his apology didn't undo the years of silence, the countless moments where I felt like I didn't belong in my own home. As for Mom, she was spiraling. Losing Paul hit her hard, and now she was desperate to hold on to me. She started calling constantly, leaving voicemails that swung between tearful pleas and angry rants. "Brian, I'm sorry, okay? I didn't mean for things to get this bad. Please, just come home. We can fix this." But there was no fixing this. She had lied to Paul about me, allowed him and his kids to treat me like I was invisible, and then had the nerve to blame me for everything when it all fell apart. Dad wasn't having any of it. He told me not to answer her calls and assured me that he was handling things. He'd already filed for full custody, and now that Paul was out of the picture, Mom's case was falling apart. A few weeks later, she tried to play the sympathy card. She showed up at Dad's house looking disheveled and tearful. It was the first time I'd seen her since everything blew up, and honestly, it just made me sad. "I just want to talk," she said, her voice shaky. "Brian, I love you. I made mistakes, but I did it all because I was scared of losing you. I didn't know how to respond to that. How could she say she loved me when her actions told a different story? For years, she let me feel isolated and unwanted, all because she didn't want to tell Paul the truth. I needed you to stand up for me," I told her, my voice trembling. "Instead, you let them treat me like I didn't matter, and you lied about me to cover your own mistakes." She started crying, but I didn't let it sway me. I'd spent too long feeling like my emotions didn't matter. This time, I wasn't going to back down. "I'm staying with Dad," I said firmly. "I don't want to live with you anymore." Her face crumbled, and for a moment I felt a pang of guilt. But then I remembered all the nights I spent in that house, feeling invisible while she turned a blind eye to what was happening. She left without another word, and I haven't seen her in person since. In the weeks that followed, things escalated. Paul filed for divorce, citing irreconcilable differences, and Mom lost it. She started posting cryptic, sad quotes on social media, things like, "Sometimes the ones you love hurt you the most," and "Family isn't always forever." Cousins and family friends started sending me screenshots asking what was going on. I ignored them all. I wasn't about to air my family's dirty laundry to the world. Meanwhile, Dad doubled down on his custody case. With everything that had come to light, Paul's treatment of me, Mom's lies, and the way she'd handled the break-in, the court leaned in Dad's favor. A couple of months later, the judge granted him full custody. Mom got visitation rights, but the ball was in my court now. If I didn't want to see her, I didn't have to. And honestly, I didn't want to. I felt free for the first time in years. No more walking on eggshells around Paul and his kids. No more feeling like I didn't belong. It was just me and Dad now, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like things were going to be okay. But as the dust settled, I couldn't shake the lingering sadness. My relationship with Mom was shattered, maybe beyond repair. Part of me wanted to forgive her, to rebuild what we had. But another part of me wasn't ready. She'd let me down in ways I never thought she could. After the custody ruling, life finally started to calm down, at least on the surface. I was officially living with Dad now, and while I should have felt relieved, part of me was still wrestling with everything that had happened. Mom tried reaching out a few times, but I wasn't ready to talk to her. Every call, every message felt like a wound reopening. She kept saying the same things. "I'm sorry, and I never meant to hurt you." But the damage was already done. Dad didn't push me to reconnect with her. Instead, he focused on making our home a place where I could finally breathe. We started spending more time together, going to movies, grabbing burgers, or just watching games at home. He didn't try to force conversations about what had happened unless I brought it up. "It's your call, Brian," he told me one night when we were sitting on the couch. "You decide when, or if, you're ready to talk to her." That kind of support was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. With Dad, I felt seen, heard, like I mattered. But there were moments when the sadness would creep in. I think about the way things used to be with Mom before Paul came into the picture. She'd been my rock, my cheerleader. She was the one who stayed up late helping me with school projects, and the one who taught me how to cook spaghetti when I was 10. Now, I wasn't sure who she was anymore. Paul and Mom's divorce moved forward faster than I expected. Paul wasn't wasting any time. He sent me one more email, apologizing again and saying he wished he'd known the truth sooner. He admitted that he let his bitterness cloud his judgment and that he regretted how he'd treated me. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to unpack all of that either. In the middle of all this, I started feeling guilty about something I hadn't admitted to anyone yet. Part of me felt responsible for the whole mess. If I hadn't left the house that day, maybe the robbery wouldn't have happened. Maybe Paul and Mom would still be together. Maybe Mom wouldn't have been exposed for her lies. But then I'd remind myself of something Dad said. Brian, this isn't on you. Your mom made choices, and those choices had consequences. You didn't deserve any of this. I knew he was right, but it was hard to shake that weight. Around this time, I started patching things up with my friends. I'd been distant for a while, so I explained what had been going on. They were surprisingly understanding, and just hanging out with them again helped me feel a little more like myself. One night, my best friend Jake said something that stuck with me. Dude, you've been through the ringer, but you're still here. That says a lot about you. It was such a simple statement, but it hit me hard. For years I'd been walking on eggshells, trying to keep the peace in a family that didn't see me as part of it. Now I had the chance to put myself first for once. Meanwhile, Mom wasn't handling things well. My cousins kept sending me screenshots of her social media posts. She was sharing sad quotes and vague messages like, "Family is supposed to stick together no matter what." It was frustrating. If she wanted to fix things, why not start with me instead of trying to play the victim online? Eventually, she stopped posting, and I stopped hearing from her altogether. I didn't know if that was because she'd given up or because she thought I needed space. Either way, I wasn't ready to reach out yet. As for Paul, I heard through the grapevine that he and his kids were adjusting to their new normal. I didn't feel any anger toward his sons. They were just following his lead, and honestly, they probably felt as awkward around me as I did around them. The more time passed, the more I realized I wasn't angry anymore. I was just tired. Tired of the lies, the drama, the years of feeling like I didn't belong. One night, I told Dad how I was feeling. "Maybe I'll talk to her eventually," I said quietly. "But not right now." "That's fair," he said, putting a hand on my shoulder. "Take the time you need. She's the one who has to earn your trust back, not the other way around." Hearing that felt like a weight lifting off my chest. Slowly, I started focusing on the future. School was picking up again, and I was thinking about colleges. Dad encouraged me to think big, to aim for the places I'd always dreamed of. "You've got so much ahead of you, Brian," he said one day while we were going over applications. "Don't let this hold you back." For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. But there was still one more twist I didn't see coming. Just when I thought things were finally settling down, Mom threw another curveball. It had been months since I'd last spoken to her. I was focusing on school, spending time with Dad, and slowly rebuilding my life. Then one evening, Dad got a call from her lawyer. "She's contesting the custody agreement," Dad said, his jaw tight. I stared at him, stunned. "What? Why?" He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "She claims she's changed and wants to have more time with you. Says it's unfair that I have full custody." Hearing that made my stomach churn. I hadn't even processed the mess we'd just been through, and now she wanted to fight for me again. Dad reassured me that I didn't have to do anything I wasn't comfortable with. "The court will ask for your input," he said. "You just need to be honest about what you want." The thought of facing her in court made my chest tighten. I wasn't ready to confront her, not after everything that had happened. But at the same time, I couldn't let her rewrite the narrative and pretend things were fine. A few weeks later, I sat in a small, sterile room with a court-appointed mediator. They asked me about my relationship with my mom, about how I felt living with Dad, and whether I wanted to spend more time with her. I told the truth. "I don't hate her," I said, my voice steady. "But I don't trust her either. She lied about me to Paul, let him and his kids treat me like I didn't exist, and then blamed me when everything fell apart. I'm not ready to be around her right now." The mediator nodded, jotting down notes. "And your dad?" How do you feel about living with him full time? I didn't even have to think about it. He's been my rock through all of this. I feel safe with him. When the court's decision came in, it was the same as before. Full custody for Dad, with supervised visitation rights for Mom. I thought that would be the end of it, but Mom surprised me again. She sent me a letter. It was handwritten, a rarity in our text and email world, and it caught me off guard. I sat on my bed, staring at the envelope for what felt like an eternity, before finally opening it. Inside, her words were raw and emotional. "Brian, I know I've hurt you in ways I can't take back," she wrote. "I've made so many mistakes, and I'm not asking you to forgive me right away. I just want you to know that I love you, even if I haven't always shown it the right way." She admitted to everything. The lies she told Paul, the way she let things spiral out of control, and how she prioritized her relationship over my well-being. "I was scared," she wrote. "I thought if I told Paul the truth, he'd leave me. And in trying to keep him, I pushed you away. That's something I'll regret for the rest of my life." For the first time, her words felt genuine, but I still wasn't sure if I was ready to forgive her. I showed the letter to Dad, and he read it carefully before handing it back. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I think I need more time." He nodded. "Take all the time you need. This isn't about her. It's about you." For the next few weeks, I kept the letter in my nightstand, pulling it out every now and then to reread it. Part of me wanted to believe her, to let her back into my life. But the scars she left weren't so easily healed. Meanwhile, life kept moving forward. I started applying to colleges, throwing myself into schoolwork, and reconnecting with friends. For the first time in years, I felt like I had control over my life. Mom tried reaching out a few more times, sending short texts to check in. I didn't respond, but I didn't block her either. I wasn't ready to cut her off completely, but I also wasn't ready to let her back in. One evening, I sat down with Dad after dinner. "Do you think I should talk to her?" I asked hesitantly. He looked thoughtful, leaning back in his chair. "I think that's up to you, Brian. If you think it'll help you heal, maybe it's worth a try. But don't feel obligated. You don't owe her anything." His words stayed with me. I realized that I didn't have to decide right away. Healing wasn't something that happened overnight, and that was okay. For now, I was focused on myself, my future, my happiness, and the people who truly cared about me. Mom's letter sat in my drawer, a reminder of what had been and what might still be. Maybe one day I'd be ready to open that door again. But for now, I was finally learning how to live on my own terms. And that felt like enough story too. "I Refused to Invite My Golden Kid Brother to My Wedding" is the title of this narrative. My parents then threatened me in a startling way. Hello everyone! Remember to click the subscribe button if you like these stories and would like to help the channel. It greatly benefits our channel. Let's begin the video now. It begins by saying, "It was hard to overlook how differently my parents handled my younger brother Liam and me as I grew up. Back then, I don't believe I knew what a golden child was. In retrospect, though, that's just what he was. I was the supporting role before Liam was born, and he was the family's star from the time he was born. It was different. I can still clearly remember the good old days. Every weekend, my parents would take me to the park. As I awkwardly attempted to climb the jungle gym, encourage me and push me on the swings. They would proudly display my crayon drawings on the refrigerator as though they were works of art. And they would read me bedtime stories in ridiculous accents to make me giggle. I had the impression that I was unique and important to them. But with the birth of Liam, everything changed. I initially believed the move to be typical. He was a baby, and infants require care. However, as Liam grew older, it became evident that he was more than just the family baby. The family was him. He was at the center of everything. My parents lavished him with praise for everything he accomplished. I was merely there in the interim. They didn't seem to despise me at all. It was terrible. They just stopped seeing me. I can very clearly recall my 10th birthday. I had been hinting for weeks that I wanted a bicycle. I even went so far as to cut magazine photos of motorcycles and place them on the kitchen counter for my parents to see. I pictured myself riding it around the neighborhood, enjoying the freedom that comes with having my own wheels at last, and feeling the wind in my hair. I was giddy with anticipation on my birthday. When I excitedly opened my gifts, I saw a stack of books and clothing. Please understand that while I was grateful for the presents, I was unable to conceal my displeasure. My parents told me the bike was too costly when I inquired about it. They just couldn't afford it, I told myself, trying to mask how devastated I was. However, Liam was riding a brand new bike with pride in the driveway when I got home from school 2 weeks later. He didn't even request one. My folks gave it to me as a spontaneous surprise present. I questioned why I didn't get a bike when Liam did. Liam needs more exercise, they informed me. You can get by without one. I was unsure of how to react. I wasn't okay. I felt unnoticeable. That was not a singular occurrence. Throughout our early years, this trend kept happening. My parents hardly noticed me when I made the middle school honor roll. I expected at least a good grade when I gave them my diploma. Instead, my mother responded, "That's nice, Sarah," after taking a quick look at it, and resumed watching television. However, they pretended that Liam had won a Nobel Prize when he received a B+ on a single arithmetic test. That evening, they celebrated by taking us out to supper, and I pondered in silence why my accomplishments were less significant. As we grew older, it became worse. I started working part-time at a neighborhood bookshop when I was 16 years old. I cherished that position. Having my own money at last felt so liberating, and I began to save for college. My dream is to move away from home, attend a distant school, and at last live my life as I see fit. However, my enthusiasm was short-lived. 13-year-old Liam began to gripe that it wasn't fair. He didn't have spending money, but I did. My parents had the wonderful notion that I should give him half of my paycheck rather than telling him to wait until he was old enough to start a job of his own. Half. I complained that it wasn't fair when they informed me that I thought it was a joke, but they didn't seem to mind. "Liam is your brother," they stated. "You ought to wish to assist him." They threatened to fire me from the position if I didn't comply. Seeing half of my hard-earned money vanish each month, I reluctantly gave in. It was annoying that Liam could purchase junk food and video games, but money wasn't the only factor here. Liam thought he had a right to all I had. After I acquired my license, he would steal my car, tamper with my devices, and even borrow my clothes without asking. My parents would support him if I ever voiced any complaints. "Telling your brother should make you pleased, as though it were my responsibility to make Liam's life as simple as possible," they would remark. They never once thought about training Liam to be respectful of my possessions. Why would they? They saw him as incapable of any wrongdoing. In retrospect, I don't even hold Liam solely responsible. He was informed as a child that he was the universe's center. It ached, but he didn't know any better. It gnawed at me a bit more each time my parents ignored me or downplayed my emotions. I began to question whether I was the issue. Did I make too many demands? Was I inadequate? How come they weren't as invested in me as they were in Liam? I put a lot of effort into my studies in spite of everything. Perhaps I reasoned if I achieved enough, they would take notice. I participated in extracurricular activities, volunteered on the weekends, and received straight A's. However, no matter how much I accomplished, it was never sufficient. After giving me a courteous good job, my parents would leave. In the meantime, they would act as though Liam's sneeze was the most amazing thing ever. I was more than just wounded. I was upset. I'm upset with Liam for being the best child. I'm upset with my parents for giving me the impression that I was unimportant, and upset with myself for continuing to want their approval in spite of everything. I did my best to ignore it. Favoritism caused wounds. It influenced my self-perception and relationship philosophy. I developed a strong sense of independence and resolved to stop depending on other people for approval. However, I harbored a deep-seated sense of inadequacy. I always felt like the little girl who didn't get a bike for her birthday, no matter what I did. I had come to terms with the fact that my family would not change by the time I was 18, and starting college. My parents' partiality for Liam wasn't a passing fad. It served as the cornerstone of our familial relationship. I had tried unsuccessfully to prove myself to them during my adolescence. At that point, I was done trying to impress them, and I focused on getting accepted into my dream. School was supposed to be my big moment. I'd worked hard for it, balancing extracurriculars, volunteer work, and a part-time job, all while keeping my grades up. I got a partial scholarship, which meant I wouldn't have to rely on my parents for much financial support. When the acceptance letter arrived, I was over the moon. I rushed to share the news with my parents, imagining for just a second that they might finally be proud of me. Their reaction was underwhelming, to say the least. My mom glanced at the letter and said, "That's nice, sweetie." Before going back to her crossword work, my dad scarcely looked up from the TV. "Good for you," he remarked, as if I'd just informed him I'd completed cleaning my room. Any chance I had of them appreciating my success was soon destroyed. A few years later, when Liam got into a community college, the difference in their expressions couldn't have been more striking. They gave him a lavish celebration, replete with caterers and decorations. I recall standing in the corner of the living room throughout the party, watching everyone fawn over Liam like he'd just been accepted into an Ivy League school. I felt unnoticeable. Still, I was determined to make the most of my time in college. I acquired a second job to assist cover my bills and saved every dime I could. Photography became my getaway. I'd always liked shooting photographs, and my photography class rapidly became the focus of my week. My lecturer even pushed me to put some of my work into local contests. I wanted to save up for a high-grade camera, something that would allow me to take my photography to the next level. For months, I worked additional shifts and skipped out on simple comforts like coffee trips or evenings out with friends. The idea of eventually purchasing that camera kept me motivated even if it wasn't easy. I even kept track of every dollar I saved and made a budget. I was thrilled to make the purchase when winter break finally arrived. I was spending a few weeks with my folks, and on my next day off, I was going to the grocery. However, I discovered that I had been hiding money in my old desk drawer. I realized right away that something was amiss. A large portion of it was missing. I initially assumed I must have made a mistake in my calculations. In the hopes that I had made a mistake, I tallied the remaining funds 3 times. However, I was well aware of what had transpired. Liam had accepted it. He had previously taken things from me without asking, so I wasn't sure this time would be any different. He made no attempt to dispute it when I challenged him. "Yeah, I took some," he responded nonchalantly, as though it were insignificant. He clarified that he thought I wouldn't mind because he needed the money to purchase a new gaming system. As usual, my parents sprang to his support. My mother remarked, "It's not like he stole it. He is your sibling. You ought to wish to assist him." My father added, his voice, "Sarah, you may always start saving again. The world won't end because of it." I was enraged. They pretended it didn't matter that I had sacrificed time and effort for months in order to get that money. My parents didn't support me when I insisted that Liam give me the console back and reimburse me. Rather, they accused me of placing the cash in a location where Liam might discover it. They stated, "You should have concealed it better," as though I was at fault for assuming that my possessions would be secure in my own house. I came to the realization that neither Liam nor my relationship with my parents could be fixed at that point. The money and the camera weren't the only factors. It had to do with the years of partiality, the way they consistently disregarded my emotions, and the way they consistently prioritized Liam's demands above mine. Everything I did. After that, I would always finish second. I began to back away. I no longer made weekend trips, and I steered clear of family get-togethers at all costs. I tried to be quiet as much as possible when I was at home, which just made my parents accuse me more. "You've evolved," they would say. "You believe that you are now too good for us." Naturally, Liam used every chance to remind me of how frigid I had becoming. He once smirked as though he was happy of being the favorite, saying, "You're just jealous because I'm the favorite." The problem is that he was not mistaken. I wasn't jealous in the sense he believed. I didn't feel envious of his video games or our parents' attention. He had a bond with them that I could only imagine, and I was envious. A part of me wishes they treated me the same way they did him, despite my desire to quit caring. However, hoping made no difference, and I realized I couldn't continue to hope for that. I thus gave my academics and photography my whole attention. In order to avoid coming home, I took up extra shifts at work and stayed on campus as much as possible. I felt better the less time I spent with my family. In hindsight, the camera incident marked a sea change in my life. For the first time, I genuinely came to terms with the fact that no matter how much I tried, my parents would not change. It made me feel free, but it also ached. I gave up attempting to win their favor and concentrated on creating a life for myself. I no longer required their approval. I had my own objectives and interests, and for the first time, I began to see a life free from the harmful influence of my family. Although coming to this conclusion wasn't simple, it was the first step in getting my freedom back. And I'm thankful for it. I had succeeded in creating a secure and satisfying life for myself by the time Noah and I began organizing our wedding. For the first time, I felt like I had the freedom to choose the type of family I wanted, and I was in a loving relationship with someone who truly respected and supported me. Even though I was thrilled to marry Noah, I was terrified of the idea of including my family in the wedding. Since Noah brought up the subject of inviting my parents, Liam has cast a pall over what ought to have been a happy occasion. I initially didn't give it any thought at all. Without having to worry about family drama, I wanted to enjoy the joy of getting engaged and concentrate on organizing the wedding of my dreams. However, I was aware that my parents would eventually call to insist on receiving their invitations. My mother called first, as I had anticipated. At first, she seemed upbeat as she inquired about the wedding planning process and struck up a conversation about the weather. However, I could sense that she was preparing something. She eventually posed the topic I had been dreading after a few minutes. When can we anticipate receiving our invites then? I paused, experiencing knots in my gut. Mom, I started off cautiously. I've given this a lot of thought and I don't think you, Dad, or Liam should attend the wedding. It was so quiet on the other end of the telephone. Then she spoke in a harsh, accusing tone. What are you discussing? Your family is us. I did my best to politely express my thinking. I informed her that I didn't want to invite those who had hurt me so much over the years since the wedding was meant to be a day of love and celebration. I mentioned certain cases of partiality and the impact they had on me. I wanted her to understand my perspective, not to feel guilty. Her reaction was precisely what I had dreaded and anticipated. "You're being selfish, Sarah," she said. "We are being punished by you for events that occurred years ago. Liam is inconsolable. You're ruining his heart since he was so thrilled to be a part of your special day." I was taken aback by the statement. "What are you saying? Join me on my special day?" I inquired, already fearing the response. "Liam has apparently been informing everyone that he would be my best man." I was stunned for a minute by the ridiculousness of it all. He had somehow persuaded himself that he was entitled to a significant part in my wedding, even though I hadn't spoken to him in years. My mother dismissed this when I brought it up to her. "Sarah, he's your brother. He figured you would want him with you, of course." Shortly after that, I hung up, tired and furious. The drama didn't end there, though. In only a few hours, my dad called, continuing where my mother had left off. He spoke in a more combative tone, accusing me of destroying the family and allowing my resentment of Liam to spoil what ought to have been a joyous event. He added that if I allowed them to attend the wedding, they would be ready to overlook my aloof conduct over the years. I wasn't going to fall for this old-fashioned manipulation technique. Liam began messaging me constantly after I rejected. His texts were self-pitying, aggressive, and plain rude. He accused me of attempting to feel significant by excluding him, calling me ungrateful, resentful, and envious. He seemed to have rebuilt our entire upbringing in his head, making me the bad guy and himself the victim. My parents' threat to remove me from their will if I didn't invite them was the last straw. That could have alarmed me a few years ago, but today it has just strengthened my resolve. They had nothing to offer me. Not their cash, their endorsement, and most definitely not their attendance at my wedding. During all of this, Noah was my pillar of support. Without ever attempting to steer me in any one direction, he listened to me calmly as I screamed about my family. He gave me his full support when I informed him that I had chosen to adhere to my initial plan of not inviting them. "Today is your day," he declared. "There is nothing that you owe them," but other of our pals weren't that sympathetic. Some of them advised me to invite my family in order to maintain harmony, claiming that I could come to regret not doing so. My doubts were sown by their remarks, and for a time I questioned whether I was being too severe. Then I remembered all the years of pain. Liam's entitlement was always made possible by my parents' persistent rejection of my emotions. I felt certain that I was making the proper decision. The wedding was approaching. I took additional care to make sure things would work well, as did Noah. In case my relatives showed up without invitation, we hired security for the location. In order to guard against last-minute sabotage, we also password protected all of our vendor accounts. Even though having to do these actions seemed absurd, I wasn't going to let them spoil my wonderful day. Planning the wedding with Noah was enjoyable, even though I had to deal with my family. We selected a stunning outside space, a cuisine that suited our interests, and even used the living area to rehearse our first dance. I felt like I was making something positive, something that was really mine, and I laughed every time one of us unintentionally walked on the other's foot for the first time in a long time. Although I secretly knew it wouldn't, I wish I could claim that the family turmoil stopped there. I didn't expect my parents and Liam to follow my limits now, as they had ignored them throughout my childhood. However, I was also aware of my increased strength. I wouldn't allow them to steer the story this time. I was finally taking charge of my life and my wedding. Excitation, anxiety, and, if I'm being really honest, a hint of melancholy were all there on the morning of the wedding. Even though I had mentally prepared myself to face this day without Liam and my parents, I secretly hoped that things had turned out differently. I didn't think about it for very long, though. I wasn't going to let any residual animosity to mar Noah's day in my life. My bridesmaids were the ideal mix of encouraging and amusing, and they helped me get ready at the location. We raved over how lovely everything looked, laughed about old memories, and discussed if my hair needed a few more curls. The location exceeded my expectations in terms of beauty. A charming garden with blossoming flowers, delicate string lights, and a mild wind that added to the enchanted atmosphere. As I sat in front of the mirror applying my makeup, everything was just as Noah and I had imagined. Emily, my maid of honor, entered the room abruptly and appeared agitated. "Your family is here, Sarah," she said in a whisper, looking over her shoulder as though they could show up behind her. For a minute I froze. "What are you saying? Right here?" I inquired, already fearing the response. Emily clarified that Liam and my parents had arrived at the door, fully clothed, and certain that they were there to help me. According to her, they were fighting with the security personnel and wouldn't go. After all the turmoil building up to this day, I felt a mixture of incredulity and rage. Perhaps foolishly, I had thought that they would at last respect my boundaries. I had obviously been mistaken. I thought for a second about going out there myself to deal with it. But then I knew I couldn't let them ruin my day when I saw myself in my wedding gown in the mirror. Leave it to security. "I'm not getting involved," I told Emily firmly. She gave a nod and went to see how things were going. I made an effort to concentrate on the present, but it was difficult to avoid feeling as depressed as I had anticipated. Even on one of the most significant days of my life, it still stung to know that my own family was unable to honor my desires. After a few minutes, Emily returned to inform me that they had been successfully removed off the site by the security staff. "They fought a little, but now they're gone." She spoke in a comforting tone. I took a deep breath, reminded myself that the worst was past, and thanked her. Then the time arrived. As the music started, I clutched my bouquet while standing at the end of the aisle. All of my anxieties vanished when I saw Noah standing at the altar. I felt a wave of peace come over me as he gazed at me with such joy and affection. This was important. The future we were creating together, him and us. The ceremony fulfilled all of my expectations. I was overcome with thankfulness for Noah and the life we were beginning together as I said my vows, which we had written together. He spoke about how I had taught him the real meaning of perseverance and strength when it was his time. I'll confess that everyone in the crowd, including myself, was paying attention. We proceeded to the reception following the ceremony, which was an exuberant celebration from beginning to end. The speeches were moving, the food was excellent, and the dance floor was crowded the whole time. The unexpected performance by Noah was one of the highlights. With his college band, he performed a song he had written specifically for me. I was both laughing and sobbing at this beautiful, unexpected gesture. However, my maid of honor speech was the night's most poignant moment. Emily described how she has seen me develop into the resilient, powerful person I am now. She brought up the difficulties I had encountered with my family, not to be depressed, but to emphasize how I had overcome them all, to establish a happy and loving existence. For the first time in a long time, I felt genuinely seen and understood, and her comments made me cry. I was surrounded by folks who truly cared about me all night long. As always, Noah's family welcomed me with open arms and treated me as like I were one of their own. At one point, his mother even grabbed me away to express her pride in me. She squeezed my hand and whispered, "Sarah, you're such an amazing woman. Both Noah and us are fortunate to have you." I couldn't really describe how much hearing those words meant to me. I had never experienced the type of support I had always yearned for from my own family, and I came to a realization at that same instant. Family is more than simply blood. It's about the individuals that support you, love you without conditions, and rejoice in your joy as though it were their own. I couldn't help but think about how far I'd come as the night wore on. I could have let my family's actions to spoil this day at one point. Even if it meant sacrificing my happiness, I would have gone to great lengths to get their approval. However, it is no longer the case. I had developed the ability to establish limits and the fortitude to put my health and well-being first. "It's becoming late at night." He leaned down and spoke while Noah and I danced beneath the sparkling lights. "I am really pleased with you." To me, that meant everything, even though it was such a simple phrase. I was aware that he was discussing more than simply the wedding. He was proud of me for defending my rights, for escaping the poisonous relationship that had shaped so much of my life, and for deciding on a happy and loving future. The day of the wedding wasn't flawless. It was ideal for us, but no day ever is. It was a celebration of resiliency, love, and the beginning of something lovely. And I was certain that I had made the proper choice as I turned to face our friends and Noah's family, who were all grinning. Although there were many different feelings in the days after the wedding, relief was the most overwhelming one. For the first time in a long, long time. The drama in my family didn't overtake me. Despite everything, Noah and I were able to have a lovely drama-free ceremony and were now legally married. I could finally let go of the harmful influence of my family, and it seemed like the start of a new chapter. Our honeymoon was the ideal way to start again. We were isolated from everything and everyone for 2 weeks in a little seaside village. It was just what we needed, but it wasn't ostentatious or gaudy. For the first time in years, we enjoyed one another's company while strolling along the beach and visiting nearby cafes. I was genuinely at ease. Noah mentioned something I had been avoiding since the wedding one evening, as we watched the sunset. "Have you considered your family's next course of action?" Gently, he inquired. I wasn't under his pressure, only attempting to assist me in processing things. I paused, gazing out at the surf. I said, "I don't know." While a part of me wants to reach out and attempt to make things better, another part of me simply doesn't want to. I do not wish to return to the previous state of affairs. Noah gave a contemplative nod. "Sarah, you owe them nothing," he continued, "but I'll be there for you no matter what." The thing with Noah was that he never attempted to influence my choices or give me instructions. He simply supported me through everything. And I needed it just that much. I gave his question a lot of attention over the following several days. For years, my family had disregarded my emotions, disregarded my limits, and condoned Liam's actions. Was it truly my intention to reopen that door? I knew the answer was no. For me, the wedding served as a wake-up call. It was more than simply a breach of my limits when they tried to wreck it. It served as a reminder of their lack of regard for me. For my own peace of mind, I couldn't continue to expect that they would change, and they hadn't. I have to get over this. I had to make the tough choice to ban my family's phone numbers and social media accounts when we returned from our honeymoon. It wasn't about permanently removing them from my life. It was about making room for me to recover and concentrate on my future. Although I knew it would be difficult, I also knew it was essential. Naturally, progress did not come without obstacles. I received an email from Liam a few weeks following the wedding. I was still apprehensive, even though it was a lot more subdued than the text he had written prior to the wedding. He stated in the email that he wanted to make apologies after conducting a lot of introspection. He even admitted to stealing my camera money and downplaying my accomplishments. Among other ways, he had harmed me in the past. I couldn't get rid of the sensation that it was simply another manipulation, despite my best efforts to think he was honest. This was the same individual who had attempted to attend my wedding after all. In my kind response, I thanked him for his apologies, but made it apparent that I wasn't prepared to get back in touch. However, my parents didn't even make an effort to get in touch. Rather, they had their extended family fabricate their own story. According to what I was informed by an aunt, my mother told everyone that I was losing my mind and alienating my family. By claiming that my parents were devastated and only wanted their daughter back, another relative attempted to use guilt to get me to make amends. This was precisely the reason I had first established distance, and I had to remind myself of it. My family had been ignoring my sentiments for years, and now they were doing it again, louder and with more people. Although it was painful, it also confirmed that I had made the correct choice. Noah was my rock through it all. He was there to remind me of my progress whenever I felt overwhelmed or began to question myself. One evening when we were sitting on our couch, he informed me, "You're stronger than you think." Outside, the city lights sparkle. "Sarah, you've created this wonderful life for yourself. Nobody should be able to take that away from you." He was correct. I felt like I was in charge of my own life for the first time in years. I wasn't attempting to mend relationships that had never been healthy in the first place, nor was I living for the approval of my family. Rather, I was constructing a future with a person who valued and loved me for who I was. It was not necessary to ignore the past in order to move on. It means picking up lessons from it and going in a new direction. And I was doing precisely that. Even though I had no idea what lay ahead, I felt optimistic for the first time since I was the one crafting the narrative this time. Story 3. Thus, I found myself at the age of 24, right in the center of what seems to be the most significant family drama of my life. And to be honest, it's making me feel really anxious. My family portrays me as the antagonist in this situation, claiming that I only care about myself. However, it is just not the case. And in order to get through this mess, I'm really hoping to obtain some outside perspective. Let quote go back in time to around 7 years ago. Imagine this: my dad, my stepmother, and my 32-year-old stepsister Anna periodically stop over to say hello. I had recently graduated from high school and was at a significant turning point in my life, attempting to determine my next course of action. My name was being called to college. I sensed it. I had been daydreaming about everything, the books, the new pals, and college life. I tell my dad that I envision myself going to college once we sit down, and I lay my cards on the table. Dad didn't appear to mind. Actually, more than cool. He shockingly reveals that he has been saving money for my education fund. That golden ticket was all I needed. A letter of acceptance to college. A little while later, and presto, I receive the mail. I'm on board. I'm ecstatic that I was accepted to one of the nearby community colleges. I dash home and burst through the door, eager to tell my dad the wonderful news. However, the scene I entered was completely different from what I had imagined. There, my stepmother interrupts me with this complete mood killer as soon as I tell her about college. As it happens, the funds designated for my college aspirations have been expended, spent money on something they thought was more important. She is stating this as if it were unimportant, recommending that I put my ambitions on hold and wait another year. As I stand there, my exhilaration giving way to incredulity, I look to my dad in the vain hope that he has a different narrative. However, he appears to be going to walk the plank as he simply nods along. My heart fell. I was prepared to face the world, and all of a sudden, it seemed like someone had taken me by surprise. With all the bravery I possess, I ask my father directly, what could be so pressing that my future and college funds have to take a back seat? The situation became quite complex at that point. So there I was, talking to my dad in hopes of getting some sort of rational explanation for why my college cash had disappeared. What is it that he tells me? They gave my stepsister Anna all that money so she could improve our living arrangements. Like, really? Let me now paint you a portrait of Anna. She is from my stepmother's past journey before she started seeing my dad and Anna. She has always been a bit of a wild card. In fact, she was so out of the ordinary that she never even completed high school. In the present, Anna is 25 years old and about to give birth to twins, bringing her total number of children to 4. All of them have separate fathers who have essentially abandoned her. I was shocked to learn that they had paid for her using my college funds. I was unable to contain it. I told my dad up front that what they did was very unjust. Their justification? Anna is in fact expecting once again, this time, twins. Additionally, she is a single mother of 3 children. They felt compelled to assist her in some way. As I stood there attempting to understand this reasoning, I asked my dad how they could have believed that this was more significant than my future and my aspirations to go college. In essence, he advised me to relax and simply reapply the following year. That made me pause and reflect. What happens if Anna chooses to have a second child the following year? Should I put my life on hold once more? I was even more irritated since Dad had nothing to say about that. I sobbed and let everything out that entire night because I felt so deceived. They didn't hesitate to put my ambitions and dreams on hold since they were so focused on making Anna's life a little easier. However, it wasn't enough to just sit there and feel sorry for me. I realized I needed to take action, especially considering how well I did on my final exams. It dawned on me then, why not search for universities that provide financial aid? I was resolved not to let this setback dissuade me. I began looking for any scholarship option I could come across. I was prepared to take charge of my own destiny and stop letting other people tell me what I could and couldn't do. That quote's the strategy then. I'm throwing myself into getting those scholarships and attending college. Whatever happens. Guess what then? In fact, I received complete tuition at one of those prestigious universities located distant from my birthplace. Yes, a full scholarship that includes everything. My golden ticket out of there was that. Without giving it any thought, I packed my luggage and departed. I had had enough of people who didn't care about anybody else's future and thought it was fine to forsake mine. My dad made a few attempts to call me after I left, but I honestly told him to spend that time with his wonderful grandchildren instead. I was perfectly content to simply go on and avoid looking back. After 7 years, a lot has transpired. I spent 3 years working in the same state where I attended college after graduating and landing a very nice job. But pay attention to this. My employer chose to send me back to my home state to work in our main office only last month. Isn't that a complete circle? Last week, I reorganized everything and moved back. This is when the exciting part begins. My stepmother calls me on my uncle's phone a few days after I returned since, yes, I blocked her number years ago. She surprises me with her revelation. Since she bounced, Anna's children, who are now 6, 9, 10, and 12 years old, have not seen her. My stepmother is attempting to drag me into their problem by claiming that they need my assistance with the children. I said, "Hold on. What? I take it you're kidding?" She goes on to say that because my dad is retired and she is unemployed, they are having difficulty caring for the children and would want me to take them in. I quickly shut it down since I couldn't believe what I was hearing. She attempted to guilt-trip me by accusing me of being cold-hearted and evil for declining, but I retaliated by telling her that I was doing far better than her daughter, who abandoned her own children. I even questioned her. If the positions were reversed, would you be asking Anna to look after children? And it was me who departed. After that, she didn't say much. That quotes the drama I'm now dealing with then. I feel like I've gone full circle after all that's occurred, but now they're attempting to drag me into their mess. But when it comes to family turmoil that attempts to drag you back into the chaos you've worked so hard to escape, I've learned a few things about maintaining my ground. Here quotes the thing then. I said to my stepmother, "Look, if my dad can spend my college money on Anna because he thinks he's being good, then that's his decision." Though Anna, who hasn't exactly been the mother of the year, decided she couldn't manage a full group of children, I'm not going to play Superman and take them in. I made it very evident that Anna had already attempted to destroy my future with her drama, and I had no intention of allowing her or her trash to ruin my life once more. To be honest, Anna most likely went off since she realized that having a large family would essentially eliminate her dating life. In an attempt to instill some common sense in my stepmother, I advised her to stop phoning me and instead look for Anna instead. I then wondered if this made me the antagonist in this tale. However, my dad calls me out of the blue, a few days later. He even apologized for essentially ignoring me for so long, without even checking in while I was struggling through college alone. I was a little taken aback when I heard him apologize and mean it. I thus made the decision to forgive him and move on from the past. Returning to the Anna story, she attempted to pull a quick one by bringing this man home and claiming that he was prepared to put a ring on it. This is where things get juicy, though. Everything erupts as the kids get home, ecstatic to see their mother. Without giving it any thought, my stepmother tells the man that Anna is a mother. The man loses it and starts driving. Now Anna and her mother are having a terrible argument, with Anna accusing her of ruining her romantic life, as well as my stepmother. She only wants Anna to return her children immediately and has no idea why she is receiving so much criticism. In the meantime, I'm planning to find my dad a peaceful place to live that is apart from this whole soap play. Given all the previous turmoil, I reasoned that it was the least I could do for him. I'm done with Anna and my stepmother. All I care about is making sure my dad has some serenity for once. Even if he wasn't flawless, he was still my father in the end. Am I the jerk then? A story to tell. Here's the deal then. I had been married to my wife for 10 years. Then she suddenly starts cheating. Imagine this. This Thursday afternoon is much like any other. I was attempting to get rid of the tension of the day by relaxing in bed next my wife after returning from work and taking a shower. She got up to get ready for her next shift and went into our master bedroom. I'm lying there with little on my mind, browsing around TikTok, when I received this SMS from an unknown number. Using my name and everything, the message asks whether I am who I say I am. Yeah, that's me, I think. They then re-ask to make sure they have my entire name correct. They told me they were truly sorry, but they also had to tell me that my wife had been cheating on me and they had text evidence to support their claims. I can attest to that. This individual emails me screenshots of discussions in which my wife is discussing with someone how she has a coworker that is unable to control his hands. She quotes making jokes, claiming to have produced a little monster, and stating that she would never date a coworker, especially a married one. Then again, oops. It turns out that she has been boasting to a random guy about having an affair. In these texts, she tells this guy that she may have pursued things further if they lived closer. Yes, I was utterly devastated. We've been together for 10 years and married for 9. Together, we have created this entire existence and had 3 wonderful children. I simply lost it when I read those sentences. Trying to comprehend how all we had created was simply collapsing left me in a state of full emotional collapse. I thus concluded that I couldn't ignore this. I had to be honest with her about it. I explained everything and asked her to come outside so we could talk. Her initial response? Complete rejection. She's saying that you're crazy. That is not something I would ever do. However, I was prepared. I informed her that it was time for her to be honest, since I had the screenshots and the evidence. She has a certain expression when she's caught telling a huge, fat lie, you know. She appeared to be wearing a Halloween mask at that very moment, based on the messages I saw. After confessing to physically playing about with one person, she engaged in some flirtatious behavior with another. She would not go any farther than that. But if she's admitting to that, what more is there, I wonder in my mind? Is she too ashamed to reveal any more secrets? I've always made it very apparent to her and to myself that infidelity is unacceptable. I used to say that if it ever occurred, I would dump her in a heartbeat. But now that I'm in the thick of things, it's far more difficult than I ever imagined. She is my spouse. I accepted those vows with all my heart. If only I could have faith that she was genuinely remorseful and that this would never happen again. I'd be open to pardoning. However, how can I? There is no longer any trust. It seems difficult to believe anything she says these days. Until we try marriage therapy, I've kind of put a stop on making any big decisions. If I'm being really honest with myself, I'm not quite sure if this is the proper course of action, but I'm leaning toward it mostly for the sake of our children. That simply blows my mind. What could possibly make someone who professes their love for you do anything like this? She has been fulfilling all of my requests and checking all the boxes ever since everything came out. However, I'm left wondering if that will ever be sufficient to mend things. You see, I'm not the kind to throw my relationship in the trash without giving it any consideration. Not that she did, apparently. I've been quite cautious about who I tell, considering the possibility that I could choose to continue our relationship. Already, my family isn't exactly her fan base, and let's just say it wouldn't look good if they found out. However, there is a significant part of me that wants I could just shout about all of this from the highest place on earth. My emotions are all over the place right now, rather than feeling like I have to hide everything. Like an unlidded high-speed mixer, attempting to choose which of the numerous emotions that are occurring at once to pay attention to is like attempting to grab smoke with your bare hands. I suppose that posting all of this here is a combination of venting and requesting some advice or insight from someone who has experienced similar situations, or even simply has an outside viewpoint. I understand that no one else can make this call for me, but I would really appreciate any assistance in sorting out this enormous emotional maze. Anybody who takes the time to comment is greatly appreciated in advance. In the third story, my sister has a 7-year-old child who occasionally still rocks diapers. He has his moments, but it's not like this all the time. Additionally, he has autism, which likely contributes to the diaper issue. I have a small group of my own, with a 9-year-old at the head of the pack and 2 munchkins at 2 and 4 in the rear. My sister and her young son will be staying with us for a while. A fire that occurred a few floors up from her apartment has left it somewhat disorganized. Additionally, they discovered some gnarly black mold growing nearby. And it's so hot outside right now, man. My husband went all out last summer and installed this enormous pool in our backyard. With all the kids coming and going to cool off here, it's as if we've become the local hotspot. Their parents are also pretty amazing, helping to maintain the appearance of our yard and occasionally grilling a lot. There have been times when my sister and I have disagreed about me nursing close to her son, or she has made strange requests for his meals. However, we resolved all of that. This is where things start to get a little sticky. Since my nephew has recently returned to wearing diapers, my sister has decided that our home should be off limits until he is fully committed to the underwear lifestyle once more. It didn't sit well with me. She could just keep him hanging out upstairs if she's that concerned about him feeling ashamed. All of these youngsters should not be kept within, away from the pool, because it is just too hot. They were able to enjoy themselves without turning into puddles. My sister is upset because her son feels excluded, particularly because he is unable to play with his cousins. Here's the problem, though. I can't prioritize one child's needs over the enjoyment and security of every other child, can I? She keeps saying that I should make special preparations for him and that I'm not being understanding enough. But I'm like, hold up. He's not my kid, and it's not like the other kids are going to make a big deal over his diaper situation. She's pretty upset with me, and my husband's kind of thinking maybe we could close off the pool for just family for a day or so. Makes me wonder, am I being unreasonable here? Story for my sister, who's 35, and she kind of sees herself as this top-notch housewife. She's got a couple of kids who are still in middle school, and she's all about the stay-at-home mom life, caring after them and her 5 dogs. Her spouse brings home the bacon, so she's entirely focused to managing the house, cooking up dinners, looking after the kids. All that house stuff. Now, the thing my sister is very proud of is her cooking. She's always trying out new dishes and gets a big joy out of cooking for other persons. But here's the kicker. She's not exactly the culinary genius she believes she is. Plus, her kitchen habits are, let's just say, not quite up to code. We quote re-talking hair everywhere because she never ties it back. Hands that don't see the sink as much as they should. Oh, and the dogs are essentially a member of the culinary staff. Our family never stops talking about how delicious her cuisine is. But to be honest, I get shivers just thinking about how it's prepared. I've grown very adept at avoiding dinner invitations by claiming that I'm too busy with work, or that I'm not hungry, which isn't entirely false. Since I work a very demanding job, to honor her husband's significant career advancement, she hosts a dinner party this one time. It's also one of those situations where it's simply impossible to say no. Because of the open-plan design of their space, the kitchen and dining area are essentially one large room. As a result, I was able to see the entire cooking demonstration from my position at the table. And wow, it was amazing. She was wearing this enormous knit sweater while cooking, and her hair was loose and everywhere. However, things worsen. In the kitchen, I saw her licking her fingers, scratching them quickly, and then petting her dachshund. She throws the dog directly onto the counter next to the cutting board to get something, and the dog begins devouring the hamburger meat she left out, just when I thought I had seen it all. I spent the entire evening trying not to appear like I was about to lose my appetizer because I was so grossed out, but I clearly didn't touch my food and instead focused on chit-chat. However, my sister was aware of it and asked me the big question, "Why aren't you eating?" When she saw that I was only moving my food around rather than actually eating, I initially attempted to avoid it by making lighthearted excuses like, "Oh, I'm just not feeling all that hungry," etc. But after a while, the truth just sort of came out, and I had to tell her the truth. I politely informed her that her cooking style is a little disgusting. We're not exactly talking about clean cooking here, not to be unkind. I brought up the entire incident in which she dipped her fingers into the meal without first cleaning them and let her hair fly everywhere. That really got to me. My sister was really shocked. She told me how hard she works on these dinners and broke down in tears at that same moment. I was calling them dirty, and here I was. She even hinted that perhaps my jealousy stemmed from the fact that I don't have a family of my own to provide for. I kind of lost my patience at that point and informed her that I was done talking to her and that I would not be eating because I am traveling alone without children. I simply left her, since it made me uneasy. However, her spouse didn't accept it. All night they flooded my phone with messages, informing me that I was completely out of line, making a big deal out of nothing, and saying that I truly offended them over the food problem. They said that the meal was good and that no hair tasted fantastic, but I never tried it, so how could I know? She asked me directly why I wasn't eating, and I gave her the truth to put the record right. Yes, I feel horrible for upsetting her. There were only the three of us, my sister, her husband, and I, not even a large family meal. Now that I'm sitting here, I'm wondering whether stating my truth made me the bad person. The final tale. I didn't help my sister with her ill children while she brought her husband to the emergency room. Am I the jerk? My sister is 30 years old and she and her husband have 5 children. Me? At 22, I have no interest in the child scene at all. For example, I just don't enjoy spending time with children. For the most part, I avoid my nieces and nephews, and I choose to do so. I don't mind at all. Here's the drama, though. All 7 members of the family contracted the coronavirus, which is difficult because it has been affecting them severely for a week. Her spouse became quite ill, became dangerously dehydrated, and had to be taken to the emergency room. In an attempt to get me to watch their 5 children while she abducted him, my sister phones me. "No way," I said, and advised her to contact her mother-in-law for assistance or call an ambulance. I thought their plans sounded good. She informs me that they are unable to pay for an ambulance and that she does not wish to bother her mother-in-law. That made me question why she was okay with me having 5 ill children. However, she believes it is excessive to ask her mother-in-law for a lift. She said that she too needed a break since she was feeling down. I simply hung up and carried on with my day since I couldn't stand it any longer. Suddenly, my mother, who lives far away, telephones me in a rage and tells me that I should have volunteered to watch my sister's children. Come on, though. That question is very out there. I've never changed a diaper or even watched a child before. 3 of the 5 sick children are still in diapers. How am I meant to manage them? After the husband was eventually taken to the emergency room by the mother-in-law, my sister is now telling everyone that I'm the worst. Here, the problem, though. She didn't support me when I needed it, and after she had her children, we hardly ever speak. Similar to the time I moved into my college residence hall. Since she hasn't been there for the little things, I'm sitting here wondering why I should be required to step in and help with such a big favor. Is it truly my fault that I declined to care my sister's children?